Welcome everyone to Enterprise.expert. Today's episode, importing data using built-in tools in QuickBooks Enterprise. By the way, just a quick caveat here, we focus on QuickBooks Enterprise and other enterprise level technologies. However, a lot of the things that we cover today is actually covered in a whole bunch of different versions of QuickBooks. So I will point out when something is enterprise only or enterprise and accountant, or if it's available across all versions of QuickBooks. So just a quick caveat there. Anyway, Enterprise Expert, a community of experts in the enterprise level technology. This is the January 2017 episode, and today is January 18th, 2017. Today's content is we'll introduce Enterprise.expert real quick. That'll take about 5 minutes. We'll talk about the differences between all methods of importing data into QuickBooks Enterprise or Desktop Accountant. And that will take about 10 minutes. And that's a really important piece because that's the conceptual framework. And it's important to kind of keep in mind that there's different methods and there's pros and cons of using each method. And then we'll do a demonstration of multiple types of data we can import into QuickBooks Enterprise. I mean, ideally, if this webinar was really complete, I mean, from the perspective of everything I know about importing data, it will likely be 12 to 15 hours long. So I understand and I recognize that it may be a bit intense in some areas. We could go kind of heavy and deep into certain topics, and some we just have to talk about them briefly, just because it would require a lot of detail to go into it. So we're going to try to do as much as possible in the 1 hour 1 hour time frame that we have, and then we'll leave it for Q&A at the end. So I'll kind of towards the end I'll read the questions and see which of those questions I can immediately answer. Anyway, who is Enterprise.expert? There's a community of experts in the enterprise level technology. I have multiple people emailing me and wanting to join. And joining basically means that you add content to our website, that you work with me, maybe some of the enterprise complicated deals that I do, and I can refer you some business or back and forth. We create content. You can come on the webinar and present some of your expertise, log into the Facebook group, and share knowledge or ask questions. And that's basically what we want. We want to get together, everyone that works in this enterprise level field, putting together and share the knowledge together. So what is this enterprise level field? Basically, we're talking about some of the medium-sized companies, the ones that are more established, they have more of a proven business concept, and they rely heavily on technology, software, hardware, that sort of thing. So we're focused heavily on ERP systems or accounting systems because I'm an accountant myself, and obviously I'm biased towards that. But I'm a strong believer that if you got your accounting system in place, you got a strong accounting system that integrates with other stuff, you're basically halfway there. And then by expert, we're not requiring anyone to be an absolute expert on everything. We want people involved to at least share their expertise on their particular technology or industry that they specialize in. So we definitely welcome anyone from that perspective. Anyway, this webinar series is done every third Wednesday of each month. You register once, you access them all. We may have special episodes with sponsor or collaborated content, maybe with some of the manufacturers. This is not a CPE webinar, so we're not trying to make this an accountant only webinar. This is more for anyone that works and lives in this space. So for that purpose, we didn't make it a certified professional education eligible webinar. And our strong focus has been all of last year in QuickBooks Enterprise, and we probably will for a couple more episodes. And we're starting to talk to some of the software manufacturers and some of the experts, and we're going to start talking about other things, SAP, Microsoft Dynamics. We're bringing some third-party add-ons to QuickBooks Enterprise that expand the functionality. We're basically actively seeking for all technologies in this space, and we're going to bring them over. About myself, my name is Hector Garcia. I'm a CPA certified information technology professional. I'm one of the lead consultants at Active CPA, which is a national ERP software consulting business. We have offices in Miami and Los Angeles, or South Los Angeles area. And I'm an advanced certified QuickBooks Pro advisor and a premier reseller. And if you want to contact me, my email is hector@activecpa.com. Now let's get right into it. Why do we want to import data, or in what context we want to import data? In some cases, we want to transfer historical data, historical transactions from another accounting system, another ERP system into QuickBooks. That's one of the most common cases. Probably the meat and potatoes of the work that we do is getting people from these old antiquated systems into QuickBooks Enterprise, or in some cases from much more advanced and expensive systems, and they really can't afford to pay 30, 40, $50,000 a year anymore, and they want to move down to QuickBooks Enterprise, and we bring in that data. So I'm going to share some of the experience that I had with bringing historical information. Now, importing lists, vendors, customers, items, and accounts. So in some cases, we don't want to bring the historical data. We just want to bring in our small database of customers, vendors, items, and accounts, and we can bring those in. And the nice thing is we can bring them in with balances, and we can bring them in without balances. So I'll actually speak to both. We'll talk about transferring lists across QuickBooks files. So that's typical scenario. Whenever I have one QuickBooks file that pretty much has everything that I need, and then in a brand new QuickBooks file, we'll bring that over as well without having to type it on. So that's another use case. Another great one is updating current information using Excel. So for example, if I have an Excel price list and my vendor keeps updating it each month, I can load that in there. Another use case is importing transactions from customers, like if the customer sends you their purchase order that you want to turn into a sales order, or a vendor sends you their bill, their invoice that you want to turn into a bill, or maybe the vendor sends you the RFQ, the price quote on what they're going to sell to you, and you turn that into a purchase order. That's another use case, and that we cannot get too deep into because that's going to require third-party software, but I'm going to discuss it when we get to that slide. And then lastly, importing transactions from banks and credit cards. So these are, I would say, in the context in which I want to talk about import, it would be limited to this 6. Now, there's other contexts like people wanting to import their timesheets and stuff like that. We just definitely cannot get too much into it. So this is probably where we will stop. Now, some people are asking about the PowerPoint, and sorry, I didn't upload the PowerPoint, but I will email it to everybody that's logged in and registered. I will email the PowerPoint. I apologize, I didn't load it before the webinar, and I just don't have time to do it now. Anyway, so let's go through all the built-in methods for importing data. So method number 1, list to IAF. This works great when transferring list data, not transactions, from one QuickBooks file to the other. Some of the pros is extremely easy to use. It's easy to follow. It can be modified in Excel. Some of the cons is the errors are not really easily understood. As I was mentioning, some of the errors are not easily understood. Sorry, I lost the full screen here. I'm not sure why my PowerPoint decided to. Okay, I apologize. All right, so the cons are some of the errors are not easily understood. So when you're importing this list to IAF, it's hard to really understand, what the error was for and where it left off, and did it cut off completely? Did it import some of it? So IAF is not great from that perspective. And also another issue is lack of support. The Intuit will not support it. If your QuickBooks file gets messed up because of it, it's your responsibility. And the documentation that's out there is a little bit difficult to read. So that's kind of like the cons about that. Now, there's a method called Advanced Excel Import, and that's only for customers, vendors, items, and accounts. Now, going back to the list to IAF for a second, the number of transactions or lists that you can bring in with IAF is much greater than the Advanced Excel Import feature. Now, I'm going to turn into an article that's here on the Intuit website. Great article, by the way. And also, as I mentioned it, I will include this on the email blast that I sent to everyone. I'll also paste it real quick on the chat log. If I can, I'll try to paste that in there in the chat log. Anyway, so that's something article that I recommend going to. And this one actually breaks down for you the different transactions types and the lists that can be imported with IAF. So as you notice, We can export, import chart of accounts, employee, vendor type, item, customer job, and a whole bunch of other things. Whereas with the advanced import that I'm mentioning right now, you can only do customers, vendors, items, and accounts. Now, what are some of the pros? It can do some error correction, so it'll let you know what the errors are, and it gives you an error log, which is actually really awesome because the error log will tell you exactly why an item didn't import. Um, and it's great for updating the data. Now, the spreadsheets need to be massaged a little bit for a perfect import. So that basically means that you have to make sure the columns are working in a certain way, and there's no copy and paste style for importing. So what I'll do at this point is that I'll stop and then I'll do a demonstration just because I don't want to get too deep and heavy into the concepts without doing an actual demo. So let me open up a QuickBooks file here that has information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export some lists. Okay. So I'm going to export some lists. So I'm opening up a sample file, and then I'm going to import that information into a blank file. So there's my sample file that should be showing up in here. Okay, so let's say that in this sample file, I have a full chart of accounts, right? And that has balances and that has information. And I have a full, let's say, vendor list. And that also has information, right? So I got all my vendors with balances. But what I only want to bring in is those names, chart of accounts and vendors. I don't want transactions. I don't want balances. This is actually an extremely easy concept. So we go to the File menu. Then we click on Utilities. Then we click on Export. And then we click on List to IIF. And this is, again, I'm in the source file, a source QuickBooks files that contains the data that I want, and I want to transfer it into a new blank file. So I basically just pick the chart of accounts, whatever it is that I want to bring in, and the vendor list. So I pick those two and those two only, hit OK, and then it's going to ask me, what would you like to name this file? So we'll call it COA and vendor list, something like that, something that's easy to identify. And basically that's it. You click a couple of things and then you're good to go. So what I can do is I can click on File. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the other company file. Okay, and you have to be admin and you have to be single user. I mean, there's just a couple of important little caveats within the world of QuickBooks to be able to use some of this functionality. Anyway, I want to show you that in this blank QuickBooks file, when I go to my chart of accounts, it's blank, or it only has a few accounts in there. And when I go in my vendor list, that's also blank. There's nothing there. And for me to import it back in, I click on the File menu. Then I click on Utilities, then Import, then IIF file. Then I pick my COA vendor list file that's there, and I click on Open. Okay, and then I hit OK. And see, I got some error messages, and honestly, most of them didn't make any sense. But anyway, so once I import that in there, you see that I have my entire vendor list. I'm going to expand this. So I got my entire vendor list in here. It's got no balances, no transactions, but my vendor list is in there. And if I go in my chart of accounts, my chart of accounts is 100% in there. So that's first use case. So I do a transfer from one file to the other. Another use case would be using the same exact process. It would be changing an attribute to one of these list items. So for example, let's say I want to change the address, okay, the address of some of my vendors. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to click on Utilities and click Export, List to IAF. And I'm only going to import my vendor list. Now, I can't select, only active vendors. I can't select, only the vendors I've used in the past couple months. I can't do that. Like, it's the entire vendor list or none, because I get that question quite often. Now, there are some workarounds. Like, for example, if I pull a report of all the transactions I've done with vendors in the past 2 years, I could essentially do like a VLOOKUP and only bring in quote unquote active vendors. But then that will require a lot of Excel examples, and this is not an Excel webinar. However, I do have an Excel webinar on a different day, so I can tell you about that later on. Anyway, so there's my vendor IIF, and just so you know, an IIF file is something that only QuickBooks can open. However, if you open up Excel, if you open up like a blank Excel workbook of any sort, and you grab your IAF file, whatever in your computer it is, and you click and drag it on top of a blank spreadsheet. Again, I found the IAF file in my desktop somewhere, wherever I saved it, and I clicked and I dragged it into a blank Excel workbook. What Excel will do is essentially it will open the IAF file, and this is called a tab separated format. So on this file, it basically looks like a spreadsheet, and from here I could make modifications to it. So for example, I'm going to scroll down because I got my vendor names. I'm going to scroll down, let's say all the way to the bottom, and let's say for example that this one vendor name, this one called Zeng Building Suppliers. Let's say I wanted to change their address, okay, or let's say let me put an address here. Let's say a phone number. That'll be easier. So I'm going to put there 305 789 1234. So let's say, for example, I went in there and basically what I did is I used the spreadsheet to modify the data. So either added something or removed something. And if you got another spreadsheet with that data, you could technically copy and paste it in here as long as it's got the same columns and it's clean and all that stuff. And let's say, for example, that they have a new owner. It's no longer, for example, it's no longer Vivian Seng. It's now, let's say, Robert Smith. And I'm going to change it in both fields where I see their name there, just in case. So I'm updating information of a vendor inside of an IAF file, which is not a natural file we normally work with. It has a specific set of formatting and all that stuff. So I'm just going to save it, and I'm just going to click on the save button, not save as, just regular save. And on this tab delimited format, Excel's telling me, hey, by the way, none of your formatting is going to save, and that's fine, just because it's just raw data. I save it, I can close the Excel file, and then my new IAF file contains my old database with new information that I changed or updated. So this is the information we want to change. So for Seng Builders, it looks like we're trying to change, I guess, Vivian Seng's name, and we're also trying to add a phone number. So what I'll do is I go to the File menu, Utilities, Import, IAF file, and click on Vendor, and then click on Open. And any new information will be created. Any existing vendors, it would just update the data. So that's a really important piece, right? So this works great for updating as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And then we're going to see here we got Robert Smith. So I mean, there was two other fields I guess we didn't change. But if you look at this particular field down here that says Robert Smith, that's something that got changed. And notice that our main phone number got changed as well. So any fields you see there on that IAF export, so it would behoove you to kind of create one on your own QuickBooks file and see how that works. Those are all things you can update via that process, that method. Anyway, so that's the IAF method. I don't want to get any more deeper into it. Let me talk about the advanced Excel import method. So I'm going to go to the File menu, Utilities, Import, Excel files. So Utilities, Import, Excel files. And inside here, it says, hey, you want to use the newer module that we created called AddEdit Multiple List, and we'll get to that. So we're going to hit no. And I still want to talk to you about the original Advanced Import file. And that's this button here that says Advanced Import. Now, some people here are telling me that you want me to zoom in my screen. So let me run my zoom tool real quick here. So we have the capacity to zoom in. Okay. So that hopefully that helps a little bit. So it's Advanced Import. I click on that, and then it pops up this tool where it tells me select your file. And then before I select the file, let me just contextually, let me open up one of the files that I have here. And let's say, for example, I got the spreadsheet with vendor names. And the main question is, well, where do you get these spreadsheets? Well, sometimes, again, this could come from an older accounting system. It could come from another QuickBooks file, something like that. I'm just going to narrow these down to a few entries. And let's say, for example, I got this spreadsheet that has all these columns, and they have to be cleanly formatting. So I'm kind of doing that along the way. You have to have them in this sort of square format. I got vendor name, main phone number, bill to, a bill from address, and then you got all the lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are the things that you would have in a spreadsheet. So let's say, for example, I wanted to change the state for all these vendors. And again, contextually, let me go back into QuickBooks here and go into vendors, vendor center, and I'll pull up one of these vendors that I have here. Let me do one of the ones I have here on the top. So let's say, for example, this one called Wheeler's Tile. The state for this one is California. So what I'll do is on the spreadsheet itself, I will modify all these to Florida. So I'm going to just put an FL across the board here. So we got across Florida, and then I'll do a find and replace here as well and change the state from California to Florida. Now, I know these are not practical examples of things that we actually do, but I'm just trying to do something that is very obvious what are the changes that I'm making. And again, I'm taking a spreadsheet of a vendor list that I already have. So I'm doing this with the context of updating. So I'm updating the information. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And then I'm going to use the module. So I'm going to go to File, Utilities, Import Excel files, and then I'm going to use the Advanced Import. This is a big button on the right side of the screen. I'm going to click on that. Select the file that I was just working on that has all my vendors. Hit Open. And then it's the most important part is create the mapping. So there's no way that QuickBooks can guess what's what. Let me make sure I close it from Excel. Very important. You can't have it open in Excel at the same time. So when you do a mapping, you have to tell it, well, in my spreadsheet, the column is called this, but in QuickBooks, I'm actually trying to hit that field. So on the mapping name, I'm just going to call it vendor update or something like that. And that would be something that I could save. So every time I take a spreadsheet with the exact same column formatting, I can just import it again. So let's do the mapping. So I'm going to tell it that this is a vendor import. And then all these columns you see here, name, open balances, all these columns you see here, these are the ones that are allowable on this advanced import. So it would be good for you to basically create your own template, just copy and paste. Sorry, not paste, just hand copy all these QuickBooks fields you have here, put them into a template, and that's how you know what information can be brought in through this module. So import data, I'm going to pick now, just go down the list and select the vendor name. And let's say I think I was going to change the state. Okay, so state is address 5. So let me just go back and look at it because I don't remember exactly which line was it. I guess that would be valuable. So let me go back and open that spreadsheet and see if that was line 2 or line 3. So that was line 3. So that was bill from 3, the one that I'm changing the state in. So I'm going to go to address 3 and then change that to bill from 3, just letting it know that, hey, on the third line of the address, put that information that's there. Notice I don't have to put anything else because it's an update function. I don't have to do anything else. So I'm going to click on save, and then I'm going to click on preview. So what the preview does, it just lets you know real quick, line by line, what information is being looked at. And you can actually, as you go up and down, you can see what that's going to look like there, just so you can real quick visualize what is it that is coming in. So it's very, very valuable from that perspective. Now in here, you got import rows with errors, and you have don't import rows with errors. This is really important. So if you want any error to basically stop, so in this case, if you want any errors in a specific field to stop the entire row from importing, then you're going to pick don't import rows with errors. But if you want some of the data fields that QuickBooks accepted, but the ones that had errors not, then you pick the second option. I'm just very, very careful about that. Normally what I'll do is I don't import the ones with errors, so then I get to importing them in, because in some cases I don't know what came in and what didn't come in. So I'm going to click on import. And it's asking you should back up before doing it. Okay, so that should be without saying. Now it says if there's already records in QuickBooks. In this case, again, we're talking in the context of updating data. So if there's already records, should we just skip them? So if I click on keep existing data and discard import, none of the current vendors, this is if I pick the first option, none of the current vendors that are in QuickBooks will allow me to import updates to it. That's basically what it's saying. Now, the second option says replace existing data with importing data, ignoring blank fields. That's what we're going to do, by the way. So we only brought in 2 columns. So if there's any fields that are blank, I don't want them to turn blank now. I just want them to update the ones that have data. So if I go including blank fields, anything that I don't bring in on the update, I'm going to replace it with a blank. So what you want to do is you want to ignore the blank fields. That way you only update new information, and you click on apply to all. It will bring the information. If there was an error to be fixed, it will actually tell you. We save the log file, check it out. In this case, there was no errors. And then I'm going to go open up this vendor and then see that their new state is Florida. So again, we're talking about the context of updating data. Now, if we weren't updating data, so if we were not updating data, then we would pick a few of the options, and then all that stuff will come in as new vendors. So it's really, really important that will come in as new vendors. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let me go ahead and hit escape here for a second. And let me go back into my slides. Okay. So the major difference on the AddEdit Multiple, which we're going to talk about in a second, is that the AddEdit Multiple doesn't have the capacity to bring in accounts. So if you wanted to bring in accounts from a spreadsheet, you would have to use that same advanced Excel import tool. So the next one we're going to talk about is AddEdit Multiple List Items. Now, this is my favorite one. This was added somewhere around 2011, I believe. It's a very powerful tool. It doesn't bring in Excel spreadsheets, but it pretty much works all off copy and paste functionality. Real quick, very important to mention. At this point, everything we talked about, IAF import and export, and advanced Excel import, and AddEdit multiple items, all the way to this point, all the way to this last example, everything is available across all QuickBooks desktop versions. So whether it's a PC version, that's Pro, Premier, Accountant, or Enterprise, any of those four, it will work. On QuickBooks Online, forget it, nothing like that in the QuickBooks Online world. And QuickBooks Mac may have some of these, but I don't use it, so I don't want to even talk about QuickBooks Mac. Anyway, so AddEdit Multiple is really, really interesting. It also works for updating, but it's a little bit trickier, and I'm going to kind of show you. So I'm going to look at my item list just to show you that I have no items in my list. And I'm going to bring an item list that I have on a spreadsheet. Now I'm going to open up the spreadsheet real quick. And I'm also going to massage it a little bit, just because in the context of importing data, there's always massaging. And massaging is the term that I give to, playing with the Excel file until we get the data correct. So we got this price list, this item list. And I'm going to go ahead and narrow it down to maybe 10 of the items. So I'll delete everything else that's in there, and we'll just have 10 items in there. And all you really need to import an item list is you need to know what type it is. So in the QuickBooks world, typically we're importing service items, inventory items, non-inventory items. Those are typically the three types that we import. Now, depending on what item you import, in some cases you may need to recognize 3 of the accounts that it affects it. For example, if I'm importing an inventory item, I need to explicitly tell it what's going to be my income account, what's going to be my cost of goods sold account, and what's going to be my inventory asset account. If I'm importing a service item list, so not an inventory item list, then all I have to do is tell it one of the accounts. So the account is called sales, for example. So it's my sales account or whatever it is. So that has to be on the spreadsheet itself. And in the event of items that are going to be double-sided, that means that they're going to also have an expense category, then I would have to bring in their expense account as well. So let's start with some service items that are one-sided. So I'm going to go ahead and just use this item list that I have here. And If they're all the same type, like for example, these are all services, I can just delete the type. I don't need that. And any columns that don't have any information, we can get rid of that. And then we can have cost and price. That's all relevant, whether it's taxable or not. That's really important based on whether or not your QuickBooks file has sales tax turned on. And then preferred vendor could be something that I also want to do. But I'm going to go ahead and delete all that and just leave a couple of core columns here. So I'm going to leave item name, description, asset account, cost of goods sold account or expense account, cost, price, and sales tax code. And so I'm going to import these specifically. So another really important piece is there are two descriptions to an item if I'm going to have both an income account and a cost of goods sold account. And so I'm doing two columns here, one income, one cost of goods sold, or one expense account. That's either one, you can label them the same. So I'm going to have one description for sales, and then I'm going to have one description for purchases. Now, what would there be a different description for purchases? Well, maybe the way I tell my vendor that I'm buying that service from, maybe the way I explain things are in a different way, in a different context, in which the way I explain it to my customers. And I'm gonna make this list even smaller, just so I can have more manageable group of items here. So let's say, for example, I'm gonna type here under description, I'm gonna put vendor, let's say vendor to perform. I'm going to put a column there, and then basically I'm going to have the vendor description to just say vendor to perform column, and that will be something that then I'll add some more information to it afterwards. And then I got my income account and cost of goods sold account. That's really important because that needs to match my my chart of accounts. So I'm going to go into my chart of accounts real quick, and let's see. Let me make sure that I have a sales account in there. So let's say, for example, I want to hit my construction income account. So that's going to be the account that I'm going to hit when I use that item. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste construction income into that item and bring it all the way down. And let's say whenever I use that service item to pay, let's say, a subcontractor, I have to have a subcontractor. I hope I have a subcontractor account here somewhere. I don't think so. So let me create it. So I'm going to create a new one, and then I'm going to create it as a cost of goods sold, and I'm going to call it subcontractor. So subcontractor. Perfect. So I got my expense account or my cost of goods sold account called subcontractor, all in caps, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's also here. Subcontractor. Perfect. And that doesn't have to be all caps, by the way. That could be lowercase or uppercase. That doesn't make a difference. And let's say the cost for all these are, let's say, 125. I'm going to just kind of bring it across the board. The cost that I pay my subcontractor. And this could be the hourly or whatever happens to be. And my sales price, let's say, just for the heck of it, they're all 250. And they all don't have to be the same price. They could all be different prices. So once I got my spreadsheet pretty much the way I want it to work, I'm going to go into the list menu, and I'm going to click on AddEdit Multiple List Entries. So AddEdit Multiple List Entries. So AddEdit Multiple List Entries. And then I'm going to pick which list I want to import to. So in this case, them being service items, I obviously want to import into my service item list. Now, this could be the format in which these are in. They just have to be able to be open in Excel. Like, it doesn't matter if they're CSV files or Excel files. Doesn't matter what it is. As long as it's open in Excel and I can copy and paste, I'm good to go. With the previous two functions that I mentioned, IAF and I mentioned Advanced Excel Import. For those two, you have to actually bring in the Excel file. But for this functionality, it's all going to be copy and paste. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that my columns match. So I got items, description, sales, description, purchase, income account, expense account, cost, price, and sales tax code. I have to mimic my spreadsheet into this AddEdit Multiple to be able to do copy and paste. So how do I mimic that spreadsheet? Well, first of all, I got item name. That was my first one. And then my second one was my sales description. So I'm going to bring that in. And notice that as I bring it in, I'm going to click on move up, right? So I want to bring that up so it could be the next one. So we have item name, sales description. Then we got purchase description here on the left side. And let me change the zoom in so it's a little bit deeper, because I know that for some people the zoom needs to be a little bit better. So let's see, that should be much better. So I got my item name, sales description, purchase description, and then the next one, I believe it was cost. I'll bring that up to be the next one. And then I got sales price. No, I believe the next one was income account. Then I had expense account, then cost, then sales price, and then whether it's taxable or not. And it looks like this particular QuickBooks file doesn't have tax enabled. So as long as my spreadsheet, and I'm just going to compare them here next to each other, as long as my spreadsheet columns look like my chosen columns. So if I go through my columns here in the bottom, if I go through them and they match exact, then what I can do is copy my information from the spreadsheet, basically select it, right click copy or control C for copy. So we'll copy it, come into QuickBooks, and put my cursor on the top left of the screen, so it'll be on that very first item. Let that pop up go away, that's fine. Click on that, right click, and hit paste. Okay, so the minute I hit paste, my data is going to get organized into this sheet because I took my time to make sure that the columns match 100%. This was basically a beautiful thing. Now, let's say, for example, that some of this information you don't have. So I'm going to tell you a typical example. Let me go ahead and close this. I'm going to go ahead and close that, hit no. I'm going to go back into my AddEdit Multiple screen as well. And let's say that for whatever reason, my spreadsheet didn't contain the income account and the cost of goods sold account. And this happens, right? Sometimes our spreadsheets are not, whoever puts our spreadsheets together or sends it to us or whatever, doesn't really think about all these things. So I could be missing information. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it without that information. But I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I change my columns in QuickBooks to match. It was service items. So I'm going to change my columns in QuickBooks and get rid of the income account and the expense account. Now I can't get rid of them because I'm going to have to use them because I can't create the item without them. But I'm going to move them to the bottom, move them both to the bottom or to the right. And then when I paste the information, I'm going to fill those in manually. So again, I'm going to grab my data from my spreadsheet, hit copy, and then come back into QuickBooks, paste. Beautiful. If I try to save it, it won't let me because I need to have an income account, right? It won't do it without that. So I'm going to go ahead and go to income account, and then I'm going to type here construction income. And then I'm going to go to the next one and type subcontractor. And then I can click on save, and it will save that one line, and the rest that don't have one won't be saved. So I can actually sit there and type them one by one. Well, one super awesome, amazing feature that I really, really like is if they're all going to have the same sort of information, then you can do is type in one, and then watch this, right? If you've never seen this before, watch this. Your mind's about to get blown. You right click and click on copy down, okay? And everything gets copied across, and then come to the next one, subcontractor, and then right click and copy down, and then click on save changes. And that's an alternative method of doing that. So once I get out of there and I come into my item list, all my items are there. If I click on any of these, you see that I got my vendor description, and I got my sales description, I got my vendor cost, and I got my sales price. That's actually a really, really powerful tool. One of my favorite, by the way. And then the other advantage of the AddEdit is not just for importing, but for updating. So if I wanted to update a price kind of here on the fly, I could put here 270, or I can come in here and change the cost 110 and that sort of thing. Now, if I had the capacity to export my item list into Excel from QuickBooks and it matched the columns and it matched the order and everything matched 100%, technically you could copy and paste over itself. Now I'm going to show you that. It's a little bit dangerous. I want to make sure that I'm sort of making that caveat there. It's a little bit dangerous what I'm about to do, just because you have to make sure that your spreadsheets are are configured correctly. But technically, I could take current data, not new data I'm importing, current data, and I can copy and paste into any column groups and basically replace the information. As long as everything lines up 100%, you can basically copy and paste from Excel to update as well. But I'm telling you, this requires a lot of patience and skills and stuff like that. So don't jump into doing it right away. Use the other tools for updating, in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save, and that's going to update all my items in there. Okay, all right, so let me close that. Actually, no, one more. Really important one. I'll probably say the single most important one. Let's say, for example, that I'm bringing an item list that's actually inventory. Okay, so just to speed things up here, I'm going to go ahead and just add an I to all these items. That way I have a little bit of difference. So I'm going to add an I to this. I'm going to add an I and a hyphen and bring the item name in here. And I don't want don't get too much concerned about how I'm doing this in Excel. I mean, if you're interested, we're going to have the Excel Power Hour, which will discuss Excel skills. But assume for a minute that I actually have an item list that's inventory. Okay, but these inventory items also have a quantity on hand. Okay, this is very typical whenever you're doing setting up QuickBooks for the first time in January of the year or whatever, and you want to bring in a whole bunch of inventory items. So you should have, whatever quantity on hand that should be on your spreadsheet. Okay, whatever numbers those are, those should be on your spreadsheet. So I'm just gonna bring them in here, and these are my quantity on hand. And then I should have a value. Okay, so my value should be my cost. It technically should be my cost times my quantity on hand, and that needs to be there too because I'm bringing that in. And then a really important one, I need to have a column that says as of date. So as of date would be as of when I'm going to post those inventory items with those initial values into my accounting system, and when is this going to affect my books. So I'm going to put here 12/31/2016 and basically copy that across. And this is a typical case. I mean, this is like I'm swamped with work like this, helping people bring in their beginning balances from other accounting systems, or their QuickBooks basically imploded, and and we got to set up a new QuickBooks file and just bring in those beginning balances. Okay, all right. So now my spreadsheet looks a little bit different because I got sales description, purchase description. In this case, let me go ahead and copy and paste the sales description into my purchase description. So they're basically pretty much the same thing. And I'm just gonna update my prices just for the heck of it, make everything $300 across the board, make it a little bit easier to understand. Okay, so there's my inventory item list that I want to import. So let me go into QuickBooks and then pick inventory parts, and this is going to be a little bit more, it's going to require more mechanics. Okay, so let's go to customize columns, and let's just make my columns work first. So we're doing item name first, then we're doing sales description. Let me move that up, and then I'm going to move purchase description, and then I'm going to move that up. Okay, then I forgot what my next column was. All right, cost, price, quantity on hand, value, and as of date. So we got next one is going to be cost. Then we got price. Then we got where is my value? Total value. There we go. Move that up. And then we got quantity on hand. Move that up. And then we have as of date. Where are you, as of date? It's supposed to be there somewhere. Oh, there it is on the right side. Okay, so I move that to the right and move that up. And then my cost of goods sold account needs to be there. Preferred vendor doesn't have to, although I recommend it. Income account has to be there. Asset account has to be there. Everything else I can get rid of. Perfect. So I click OK. And then I'm going to come here into Excel, take my information, copy it, go to QuickBooks, paste it, Beautiful. I got my new item names, the cost description, quantity on hand, total value as of date that came in perfect. And I promise you that when you do this, it would be less smooth. Okay, I'm a professional importer. Don't try this at home. No, it's just that it'll take some patience to try a couple times and get right. But obviously, try it on a sample file, try it on a blank file first before you mess up your company file or clients if you're a QuickBooks consultant. Anyway, so we didn't have the cost of goods sold account, asset account, an income account. So I'm going to go ahead and pick an income account there. Right click, copy down. And QuickBooks does assign a default cost of goods sold, an inventory asset in the case that you want to just use the default. You can leave it there. If you need to change it, obviously change that on the fly. And then we're going to click on save changes. And then the most beautiful thing in the world, I'm going to pull up a balance sheet, and there's my inventory asset that I imported. Okay, and then I go into my reports, inventory evaluation summary. I got everything by item, by quantity. I mean, it's just a beautiful import of an inventory asset list. Now, you cannot update your quantity on hand via this tool. This is, people ask me all the time, hey, oh, that's awesome, I can update and adjust my inventory. No, this is solely, strictly, only for importing current, brand new item lists. And also you can bring in items without quantity on hand. I was just showing you an example of how you would bring in quantity on hand, but it will work the same way for a customer to import a customer list with open balances, right? You put open balance as of date. Bring a vendor list with open balances, balance as of date. As long as you add those things into the columns, you should be just fine for that. How do you deal with sub items? And that's such a monster of a question. So sub items, and let me end the polling question there. Thank you for answering that. So sub items work a little bit different, and I'm going to just show you real quick because I literally wouldn't have time to get into the details of working with sub items. But in the case that I'm working with this AddEdit Multiple entry tool, there's a, just going to open it up here. One of the columns says full item name and the other one says sub item off. So let me bring those in real quick. And I'm going to just kind of remove everything else that's there just so we can get as close as possible to just looking at these things. So we got, let me move it to the left. It'll make a lot more sense. I'm going to move it to the left and do full item name. So without getting into too much in the weeds of it. So the way I would do sub items would be, so for example, let's say that this one is a sub item of, let's call it prints. So then I would have to create another item called prints, create it completely separate. So I would have to create another item called prints by itself, which would now be sort of like an item by itself, but now will be a parent item. So I'll create a top level item, a regular item, and then when I'm working with the items, I have to make sure that in the column that says sub item off, this says prints. So basically, in a nutshell, if I wanted to make all these items a sub item of prints, I would have to have on the copy and paste, I would have to have that parent item as a separate category, but I have to import the parent item first in order for it to follow it sequentially. So I'm going to click Save Changes, and then I'm going to go in the item list and then see how the sub items are there. So hopefully that answers your question. I know that doesn't get into uber detail of dealing with sub items because sub items get a little bit trickier. There's sub items of sub items and there's multiple layers and that sort of thing. So I just can't go any deeper than that. Otherwise, the webinar would be, like I said, 8 hours or so. All right. So we have another method of importing which works both for lists and transactions. It's still called an IAF file, but it's not the regular export import list to IAF file. It's actually there's a whole kit called the IAF Kit, and I'll include that on the email. But just to show you real quick, if you actually Google Intuit IAF Kit, right? So I'll literally do it here so you can see that. So if I literally Google Intuit IAF Kit, and I go to the first, that's not, I would say one of the first ones that is not there you go, that's not an advertising. That will take me to this article that kind of explains how to use IAF Kit. And you go through the entire article, it's worth it. It will tell you all the transactions that you can import. It will actually have a template for each one. And the way that kit looks, and I'm gonna open it real quick just to show you. So that kit, once you download it, it looks like this. And there's going to be an IAF example file for every single transaction type. So, for example, let's say I wanted to import purchase orders. Good example. I want to import purchase orders. I would open up my purchase order kit. And as I mentioned before, I would literally drag and drop that into Excel. And you can see exactly what a purchase order IAF transaction looks like. Now I know we're approaching top of the hour, and I'm not gonna cut it short. I do want to finish the presentation, so if you have to leave, I'm totally okay with that. Won't be offended. But we'll probably go about 5-10 minutes long, just so we can finish everything in the presentation. Okay. So anyway, so we opened up the purchase order IAF, and it basically gives you the predetermined format of what this needs to look like in order to be able to import into your QuickBooks file. So all you have to do is take the one in your IAF kit, import it in your own sort of sample test file, see what that looks like, and then take your spreadsheet that contains information and reformat it so it looks just like this, and you can import it using an IAF format. And this is free. You don't have to buy third-party software. However, it's extremely cumbersome, possibly dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, and you have to consistently make backups of your QuickBooks files, just because there's just a possibility that it can literally destroy the file. So the pros is it covers a wider range of transactions. It can do almost every transaction, not every, but it can do almost every. I would say like 80% of them. But the cons is it's hard to understand, no documentation, or hard to understand documentation, no support from Intuit since 2007. So there's the link if you want to go straight to it, or just Google Intuit IAF Kit. The other built-in method for importing data is called bank feeds. Now, if you're extremely intrigued by it, you love this topic, and you're extremely intrigued by it, we have a webinar literally in 1 hour. So I'll take a 1 hour break. In 1 hour, that's all going to be on bank feeds. It's a different webinar. You have to register separately. It's all going to be on bank feeds. And we're going to talk about bank feeds, and we're also going to talk about having the bank feed data from the bank, or converting it from a PDF statement and stuff like that. So that bank feeds is its own world, and it literally requires an entire webinar by itself. But anyway, bank feeds is great because most banks give you the information in this format called QBO, which you can download and upload, or you can connectly link. And the pros are we can design bank rules to determine or resolve for names that are similar. So if I got Home Depot 123, Home Depot 324, Home Depot 657, and those three numbers are actually the store number, we can do bank rules and say, hey, if it says Home Depot, just call it Home Depot, call it job materials, done. And that's kind of the cool thing about bank feeds. So again, if you're interested in that, you want to join a webinar that I have in an hour at 2 o'clock Eastern about that. And the cons are it only works with banks or credit cards. So it obviously doesn't work for invoices, purchase orders, stuff like that. So you still have to download it, and you still have to design the rule and approve it before it comes into your register. And lastly, which will be the last piece of the presentation, it would be batch enter transactions. Now, before I do this part, and I'm going to do this part real quick, I want to show real quick the upcoming webinars, just in case you're just logging out. So the upcoming webinars I mentioned is at 2 p.m. We're going to talk about taking data from different formats and bringing it into QuickBooks through bank feeds. Tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, Michelle Long is going to be doing 1099s in QuickBooks Online. And on Wednesday, the 1st at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have a new webinar series called Tax Power Hour, all about taxes. So that should be tons of fun. And then at 2 p.m. on the same day, we're going to be doing Excel Power Hour, which will talk about Excel tips and tricks and some of the things that I was doing, like cleaning up data. That would be then. All the webinars, I posted it into a single website, make it easy, hectorgarcia.com/webinars. Every single webinar that I'm involved with, it's going to be listed there. So you may want to, if you want to register for this afternoon or next week or whatever, go in there and all the links to register for all the webinars, and they're free for now. And I say for now is because I really want to at some point charge for these things, but but for now they're still free. Anyway, so I know some of you are leaving. If you have to leave, that's fine. Let me now move on to batch enter transactions. Now this part, and this is why I can't end the webinar. This is the single best import tool that Intuit has given us. It's called batch enter. It's only available in enterprise or desktop accountant editions. And what's great is you get the same copy and paste functionality you get with AddEdit Multiple items, which is amazing in my perspective. But you get it for checks, for deposits, for invoices, credit memos, bills, bill credits, all as a separate transaction type. And a bonus one, which I really like, is you can also import credit cards, and there's particularly valuable because there's a whole bunch of workarounds you can do when importing stuff into a credit card. And you may want to search YouTube. I have a couple of videos on that. But that particular tool of credit cards, because this is the only one that allows you to bring in the plus and the minuses in a single sheet. So you can literally technically import like a journal entry through this tool. No time to get into that, but in the core functionality, which is checks, deposits, invoices, credit memos, bills, credits, and credit cards, that's great because that's the core of what we do. Now, the big drawback with this is you can only do single item transactions. So if you want to import an invoice with 6 items, can't do it. And the con, obviously, is journal entry is something that definitely, absolutely should have been in this tool, but they never did it. I've mentioned it to Intuit many times. Hopefully, next year they'll listen and bring that in, or maybe the year after, or whenever. I would love to see journal entries, something that I can import there, but still not there. So let me go into it itself on the software and kind of show you how that works. So depending on what version of QuickBooks you have, and like I said, everything that I did up to this point, absolutely everything works in all Windows versions of QuickBooks Pro, Premier, Accountant, Enterprise. This specifically only works in Accountant or Enterprise. So I'm going to click on the Accountant menu and then click on Batch Enter Transactions. If you don't have the Accountant edition and you have the regular Enterprise edition, it would be under the company menu, and somewhere under the bottom, it would say Batch Enter Transactions. In my case, I have the Accountant edition, so that gets its own menu, and go to Batch Enter Transactions. So I'm going to do transaction type. I'm going to do credit card and credit card charges. And let me go ahead and create a new credit card account. I'm going to call this Chase Visa. Okay. And what's really cool about this is I literally downloaded my credit card statement from today. I downloaded it from Chase. I'm going to show you the most as real life as it gets. Okay. I downloaded my actual Chase credit card, and I'm going to bring in this information into QuickBooks. This came straight from the Chase Bank. Bring it into QuickBooks using this tool. Now, in most cases, a lot of these vendors are going to be new vendors, and I'm going to show you that in a second. Because the vendors are new, QuickBooks is going to prompt me to create every single vendor. So the first thing I recommend is to import your vendor list. So normally, basically take the whole column for description, copy it. So copy the whole column. Copy the whole column. Go into QuickBooks. Go to, before I use this tool, vendor list, and going to list, AddEdit Multiple entries, and under vendors, scroll all the way down. I'm going to go ahead and paste all my vendors, and I'm pasting all the vendors, basically everything that came through the bank. And there's going to be some challenges behind that, so I'll get to that in a second. So let me click on Save Changes. I'm going to bring in my entire vendor list. Keep in mind that if he has a column, it won't work because vendors don't have sub-accounts. And also the duplicates are going to error out, which is fine. And then I'm going to click on Close. And then I'm just going to search real quick a vendor that I probably go to many times, which is my supermarket. which is called Publix, is a supermarket in Florida, and there's likely to be multiple Publixes in there. So I'm just gonna take a wild guess and say, and that's perfect example. So what happens is, I mean, this couldn't get any more quintessentially perfect than this. So I got a vendor in which I go many times, and I go to different locations, and depending on what location I go to, it brings in a number. So the problem with using what I just recommended you doing is that you're gonna bring in this humongous list of vendors, and that could be a huge problem. Okay, um, that could be a huge problem. So what you want to do before, and again, this plays into the Excel skills portion of this, but what you want to do before is you want to kind of clean this data set out in Excel first. So I'm going to show you an example. And this is a case where I downloaded 2 years worth of credit cards. So there's 900 transactions in there. But if I'm an accountant and I'm doing all these write up during tax season, I want to clean this data up first in Excel. So perfect example is I'm going to jump into Publix here, which was the supermarket I just mentioned. And what you would do is before importing that, you would just modify one like this. Okay, and this is more of an Excel thing than anything else. But you click and drag all the way down to too fast to the last Publix. That way, all the Publixes are the same across the board. Okay, that way I don't import 10 different vendors for the same thing. I'm just gonna scale back for a second. What I recommend before doing that, and I should have mentioned that, is I'm gonna duplicate this column, and I'm going to keep the original bank data because that's always contextual. So we're going to call this memo. That way I bring in the original bank data as a memo, and then I'll bring in the modified or the clean payee information on the second column. I'm telling you, this is what Star Wars fans call a Jedi trick. Okay, this is definitely using the Force here, because what happens is we change the vendor name, we miss something in Excel, and then it's really hard to go back and what did the bank call it to make sure you didn't misinterpret it somehow. So this will help you do that. So let me do this again here, but then this time around, like I said, I'm gonna modify it for all the Publixes. I'm gonna keep the original vendor name. That way I don't lose. As I mentioned, I'm not gonna lose the original memo on these, and then I'm going to go ahead and then import my new payee list, right, with my clean vendors. Again, this may take an hour or so, but with my clean vendors, and I'll prevent having multiple vendors in there. But let me just copy and paste back in there. So I'm going to go again to the same functionality, and then I'm going to just copy and paste the entire vendor list. And what's going to happen is, because that's already in there, it's just going to bring in that one that I modified. So I'm going to click on save. Let it give me an error, no big deal. Hit escape, and then my new vendor that I modified should be there. So now it should be good. So that was an important preamble to the import. Anyway, so now we're gonna make sure that we have type, transaction date, post date. Okay, we actually don't need post date, so I can get rid of that. And we don't need type, so I can get rid of that. Okay, so I got transaction date, memo, payee, and amount. Now be careful. Excel brings my charges as negatives and my credits as positives. And in QuickBooks, when you do import, your charges should be positive and your credits should be negative. So in other words, I'm going to have to, again, use Excel skills and multiply my current number times -1, or just put negative on the field and basically convert it. So I got to take this and I have to convert it. So I'm going to call this amount, and then I'm going to copy and paste special, so I get rid of the formula. Okay, delete this column. Okay, and now it could work. So that's a really important caveat. Trust me, first time I did this was a disaster because I didn't know that. So date, memo, payee, amount. So let's go into customize columns, and we got date, then we got memo, then we got payee, then we got amount. And the account is there, I can't get rid of because you have to give it a category. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to come into Excel, delete the header real quick, select all the data, right click, copy, and I hit Control A, by the way. That's the keyboard shortcut for that. And then I'm going to paste, and there it is. Now the account itself, QuickBooks can't guess it. So you still have to do that part. You're still going to have to sit there and give it an account. So if you had the account already in your spreadsheet, you could have done the accounting in the spreadsheet. I have some clients that don't want to pay for the data entry work, and they say, okay, let's collaborate. And what I do is I clean the spreadsheet for them, and then I give them the list of categories, and they say, you categorize it on the spreadsheet. And then they give me the spreadsheet back with all these categories, and then I paste them back in there. And then basically my client did all the accounting work. All I did is put it in QuickBooks for them. Anyway, so you could select the accounts here, or they do the account classification from here. If you have a lot of things that repeat, for example, like Amazon, I'm going to put here office supplies, and then I'm going to right click and click copy down, and that's going to put it across all my transactions. But then next time I have a change, right? So let's say I'm done with Amazon. There's quite a bit. I spent a lot of money on Amazon. And I get the next one, which is American Airlines. I can just change that to travel. Okay, create the account on the fly if you have to. Right click, copy down, and you get the point. Just kind of go down the list. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to click on Save Transactions. It'll bring in all the transactions in there, hopefully with the right categories. And then at that point, you got 900 transactions that literally took you like an hour or two to put there, where normally would take days to do so. All right, so that's AddEdit. I mean, there are more things to it, obviously, but I wanted to at least mention the most important part. This webinar should have been 2 hours, I understand, but it wasn't. So, and the last note here is third-party apps. So you can use a third-party app like Transaction Pro Importer or SetAccess if you have the data in Excel and you want to be able to do more robust type of importing with safe mappings and do a lot more beyond what QuickBooks can do. You can try those apps. The cons is a learning curve. You got to learn how to use another tool, and you got to pay $200 to $300 normally for a tool like that. There's other tools worth mentioning. One called IAF Transaction Creator Pro that can convert any spreadsheet into an IAF file without having to use the kit. That tool is about $100. Again, if you want to work with Excel, an IAF, that's a great tool to look at. There's a really interesting tool called Bank to IAF that will take a CSV file like the one I just had, convert it to an IAF, and this is literally the fastest way to import bank or credit card data. However, like all IAFs, is subject to massive amounts of issues. It can't be reversed, and you're going to have to use reclassified tool to fix a lot of these things if you didn't put the right account from the get-go. Anyway, next episode, next month, it will be on the 16th, so third Wednesday of actually, that'll be the 16th, or that will be that should be the 15th. Sorry, it will be the third Wednesday of February, and it will be on QuickBooks Enterprise or a related topic, but I don't know 100% what the topic is going to be. I'm still literally developing that content. Again, go to hectorgarcia.com/webinars if you want to attend any other webinar that I'm involved with, and stay connected. Check out the website, email me some ideas on what content you'd like to see, and if you want to add some, you want to be involved, absolutely contact me. Join the Facebook group, continue the discussion, ask your questions there. I actively participate on it. You literally search Enterprise Expert in Facebook and it's there. There's our Twitter handle, there's my email, and that's it. Nothing else to say. Thank you very much. For my colleagues that do taxes, happy tax season. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.